The neon signs of Port Aurora cast long shadows across the rain-slicked landing pads as Captain Marcus Vale made his way through the spaceport's crowded terminals. His worn leather jacket and calculated stride marked him as one of the countless independent operators who made their living in the outer colonies, where questions were few and credit spoke louder than morals. The message that had brought him here was simple: high-paying cargo run, no questions asked. In his line of work, that usually meant trouble, but his ship's reactor core was running on borrowed time, and beggars couldn't be choosers. The meeting point was a dingy establishment called the Stellar Drift, its entrance marked by a flickering hologram of a spacefaring vessel. Inside, the air was thick with synthetic tobacco smoke and the murmur of a dozen different languages. Marcus spotted his contact immediately, a well-dressed woman with cybernetic augmentations tracing delicate patterns across her temples. "Captain Vale," she said, her voice carrying a hint of artificial modulation. "I'm Regina Blackwood, representing certain interested parties. Please, sit." Marcus slid into the booth, noting the way her guards positioned themselves nearby. "Let's skip the pleasantries. What's the job?" Regina's augmented eyes flickered with data streams as she studied him. "Simple transport contract. Pickup from Dock 17, delivery to Nexus Station. The cargo is sensitive. Hence the premium payment." She slid a cred stick across the table. Marcus picked it up, his eyebrows rising at the figure displayed. "That's a lot of credits for a simple transport." "The first half," Regina corrected. "The rest upon delivery." "Do we have an agreement?" Marcus knew he should ask more questions. In his experience, when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. But the thought of his ship's failing reactor core made the decision for him. "Send me the coordinates." An hour later, Marcus stood at Dock 17, watching as two figures were escorted toward his ship. His heart sank as he realized what kind of cargo he'd agreed to transport. The taller figure was clearly a Lumini female, her skin emanating a soft, pearl-like glow that seemed to pulse with her emotions. Beside her walked a child, no more than 8 years old, clutching a small bag to her chest. The Lumini were known throughout the galaxy for their unique biological properties. Their bodies produced compounds that could accelerate healing and even cure certain diseases. This had made them targets for those who would exploit their abilities. Marcus had heard stories of black market laboratories where Lumini were kept as unwilling test subjects, their bodies harvested for medical compounds worth fortunes on the illegal market. "This wasn't part of the deal," Marcus said as Regina approached. "The deal is whatever we say it is, Captain," she replied coolly. "Unless you'd prefer we find someone else?" "Of course, that would require us to renegotiate your advance payment." Marcus looked at the Lumini again. The mother's eyes met his, and he felt a wave of emotion wash over him, fear, desperation, and underneath it all, a fierce determination to protect her child. The Lumini were also known for their empathic abilities, though most dismissed such stories as speculation. "What's your name?" he asked the Lumini woman. "I am Venna," she replied, her voice carrying a musical quality that seemed to resonate in his chest. "This is my daughter, Celine." Regina cleared her throat impatiently. "The cargo doesn't need names, Captain. Just get them to Nexus Station. 3 days, no delays." Marcus nodded slowly, his mind already racing through possibilities. "Right. 3 days." He gestured toward his ship, the Starseeker, its hull bearing the scars of countless close calls and desperate escapes. "This way." As they boarded, the child, Celine, looked up at him with eyes that seemed to contain entire galaxies. "Your ship feels sad," she said softly. Marcus blinked in surprise. "She's just old," he replied automatically, then caught himself. What was he doing, making small talk with cargo? But as he sealed the airlock and made his way to the cockpit, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just signed up for much more than a simple transport job. The credits in his pocket felt heavier somehow, weighted with the knowledge of what he was about to do. The Starseeker's engines hummed to life, and Marcus began the launch sequence. In the passenger compartment behind him, he could feel the presence of his two passengers, no, his cargo, he corrected himself firmly. But even as he lifted off from Port Aurora, Marcus knew he was lying to himself. This wasn't cargo. This was something else entirely, and he had a feeling his life was about to become much more complicated. The vast emptiness of space stretched before the Star-Seeker as Marcus checked the ship's systems for the third time in an hour. Something felt off. The regular ping of his radar was interrupted by an irregular blip, a shadow that appeared and disappeared too quickly to track. "You sense it too," Vena's voice came from behind him, causing him to start. She stood in the cockpit doorway, her luminescent skin casting a soft glow across the metal walls. "The danger." Marcus swiveled in his chair. "You should be in your quarters." "My quarters?" A hint of bitter amusement colored her voice. "You mean my cell?" Before Marcus could respond, the ship's proximity alarm screamed to life. 3 vessels had just dropped out of hyperspace, their signatures matching known syndicate configurations. Marcus's hands flew across the controls, activating the shield systems. "Hold on to something," he shouted as he threw the Star-Seeker into a steep dive. The pursuing ships opened fire, their energy weapons leaving trails of superheated plasma in their wake. "Celine!" Vena cried out, already running back to find her daughter. Marcus cursed under his breath. He should have known Regina wouldn't trust him with cargo this valuable without insurance. The syndicate ships were faster, better armed, and probably carried crews who wouldn't hesitate to blast the Star-Seeker into atomic particles. The ship shuddered as a glancing blow struck their aft shields. In the passenger compartment, he heard Celine cry out in fear, the sound cutting through his professional detachment like a laser through hull plating. "Engineering to bridge." The ship's systems flashed red. "We're losing containment on the reactor core." Marcus had a split second to make a decision. The nearest safe harbor was an abandoned mining station in the derelict belt, a dangerous region of space filled with the wreckage of failed colonial ventures. It wasn't ideal, but it beat dying in the cold vacuum of space. He punched in the coordinates and called back to his passengers. "Brace for emergency jump." The Star-Seeker's jump drive engaged with a whine that spoke of mechanical protest. Stars stretched into lines of light, and Marcus felt the familiar disorientation of faster-than-light travel. When they dropped back into normal space, the mining station loomed before them, a skeletal structure of metal and shadows. "We're not alone," Vena said quietly, having returned to the cockpit. She stood with one hand pressed against the wall, her skin pulsing with a faster rhythm that Marcus was beginning to recognize as stress. "What do you mean?" he asked, scanning his instruments. The pursuing ships hadn't followed them through the jump, their signatures were gone. "There are others here. I can feel them." She closed her eyes. "Desperate people. Hungry people." Marcus cursed again. Of course, abandoned stations often attracted squatters and pirates. But they had no choice. The reactor core was failing, and they needed repairs. As they approached the station, Celine appeared in the doorway, her small form radiating anxiety. "Mother, I'm scared." Vena went to her daughter, kneeling to embrace her. The interaction made Marcus uncomfortable. It was harder to think of them as cargo when they showed such human emotions. "Why are they chasing us?" he asked, keeping his eyes on the approach vector. "What makes you so valuable to them?" Vena was quiet for a long moment. "Our abilities, they're more than just healing. We can influence the very fabric of life itself. In the right hands, our gift brings healing and harmony. In the wrong hands, it becomes a weapon," Marcus finished. The pieces were starting to fall into place. The size of his payment, the syndicate's pursuit, this wasn't just about black market medical compounds. This was about something far more dangerous. The Starseeker docked with a grinding of metal on metal. Emergency lights cast red shadows across the cockpit as Marcus powered down the failing engines. They were safe for now, but he knew it wouldn't last. The Syndicate would find them eventually. "We need to move quickly," he said, standing and checking his sidearm. "Grab only what you need. We're going to find somewhere to hide until I can repair the ship." "Why are you helping us?" Celine asked, her large eyes studying him with that unnerving intensity peculiar to her species. Marcus paused. It was a good question, one he wasn't sure he had an answer to. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said finally, surprising himself with his honesty. As they prepared to enter the station, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he'd passed some point of no return. He'd chosen to protect these people, and in doing so, he'd made himself a target of one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the galaxy. But looking at Venna and Celine, seeing the hope that had begun to replace the fear in their eyes, he knew he couldn't have chosen differently. Sometimes, he reflected, the right choice was also the hardest one. The abandoned mining station creaked and groaned around them, its ancient metal bones protesting against the vacuum of space. Marcus led Venna and Celine through dimly lit corridors, his hand never far from his blaster. The station's emergency lighting cast everything in a sickly green glow, making Venna's natural luminescence seem even more otherworldly. They found temporary shelter in what had once been a hydroponics bay. Withered vines still clung to the walls, and the air held a stale, organic smell. Marcus sealed the doors and began setting up security measures while Venna helped Celine settle into a corner. "The reactor core's worse than I thought," Marcus said, checking the diagnostic readings on his portable scanner. "We're looking at least 2 days of repairs, assuming I can find the parts we need." "We don't have 2 days," Venna replied softly. She stood by a viewport, her reflection overlapping with the star-filled darkness beyond. "Director Thane won't stop hunting us." Marcus paused his work. "Director Thane? The man who bought us." Venna's skin pulsed with a deep, troubled rhythm. "He runs a research facility on Nexus Station. They're developing biological weapons there, weapons that could target specific species. Our abilities, they're the key to making it work." Marcus felt his stomach turn. Biological weapons were forbidden by every civilized world in the galaxy. The implications of what Thane planned to do with the Lumini's healing abilities were horrifying. "Why didn't you tell me this before? Would it have made a difference?" Venna turned to face him, her eyes holding his. "You were paid to transport cargo, not to care about its purpose." Before Marcus could respond, Celine called out from her corner. "Someone's coming." Marcus checked his security sensors, nothing. But he'd learned to trust the Lumini's instincts. Moments later, they heard footsteps in the corridor outside. "Hide," he whispered, positioning himself near the door with his blaster drawn. The door's lock mechanism sparked and sputtered, then gave way. A figure stepped through. It was Regina Blackwood, her cybernetic augmentations glowing in the dim light. "Really, Captain Vale?" She sighed, as if disappointed. "I expected better from you." More figures appeared behind her, heavily armed Syndicate troops. Marcus kept his blaster trained on Regina, though he knew he was outnumbered. "Walk away," he said. "Whatever Thane's paying you, it's not worth the cost." Regina's augmented eyes flickered with data streams. "Cost? Let me show you something." She activated a holographic display, showing images that made Marcus's blood run cold: test subjects, failed experiments, the horrible price of Thane's research. "This is what happens when people interfere with the director's work," she said. "Now, hand over the Lumini, and we can pretend this unfortunate lapse in judgment never happened." Marcus felt something then, a gentle touch in his mind. He knew it was Venna, sharing something with him. In that moment, he saw flashes of her memories, her homeworld, peaceful and beautiful, the day the syndicate came, the loss of her mate, the desperate flight to protect Celine. But more than that, he felt her trust in him, her belief that he would make the right choice. "No," Marcus said, his voice firm. "I won't let you take them." Regina's artificial smile faded. "Then you'll die with them." She raised her hand, signaling her troops. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. As the troops raised their weapons, Venna stepped out from hiding, her skin blazing with intense light. A wave of energy pulsed from her, and the syndicate troops staggered, clutching their heads. Regina's augmentations sparked and shorted out. Marcus didn't waste the opportunity. He fired his blaster, hitting the power conduit above the door. The explosion sealed the entrance in a shower of sparks and debris. "That won't hold them long," he said, already moving toward the emergency exit. "We need to dash." He stopped short. Venna had collapsed, her light dimming dangerously. Celine ran to her mother, crying out in distress. "What's wrong with her?" Marcus asked, kneeling beside them. "Using our abilities like that, it drains us," Celine explained, her small hands glowing as she tried to help her mother. "She needs time to recover." Time they didn't have. Marcus could hear the syndicate troops working to clear the debris. Making his decision, he gently lifted Venna in his arms. "There's a maintenance shaft that leads to the lower levels," he said. "We can lose them in the old mining tunnels." As they made their escape, Marcus knew he'd crossed a line. He was no longer just a reluctant protector, he'd actively chosen to stand against the syndicate. The price on his head would probably match Venna and Celine's now. But carrying Venna's weakened form, feeling her light pulse against his chest, hearing Celine's worried breaths behind him, he knew this was where he belonged. Sometimes the right path found you, even when you weren't looking for it. They disappeared into the darkness of the maintenance shaft just as the sound of boots echoed through the hydroponics bay. Above them, the station continued its eternal orbit, indifferent to the drama playing out within its ancient halls, while below, in its shadowy depths, 3 fugitives began their new life on the run. 2 weeks after their escape from the mining station, the Starseeker drifted in the shadow of a gas giant's rings, its repaired reactor humming quietly. Marcus stood at the viewport, watching chunks of ice and rock tumble past in their endless dance. Behind him, Celine sat cross-legged on the floor, her small hands moving through the air as she practiced controlling her abilities. "Mother says I need to learn control," she said, creating tiny pulses of light that floated like fireflies. "So I don't hurt anyone by accident." Marcus turned from the viewport, watching the young Lumini's display with a mixture of wonder and concern. In the past weeks, he'd learned more about their species than most outsiders ever knew. Their healing abilities were just the surface, their true power lay in their capacity to influence the energy of life itself. Venna entered the cockpit, her glow stronger now that she'd fully recovered. "The message is ready," she said. "Are you certain about this?" Marcus nodded. He was about to contact someone from his past, someone he'd sworn never to involve in his troubles again. But they were running out of options. The syndicate's net was closing in, and they needed allies. He activated the secure communications array, inputting a series of codes he'd memorized years ago. After several tense moments, a holographic figure materialized, Commander Rook, his former superior in the Colonial Defense Force. The years hadn't changed her much, she still had the same steel-gray hair and piercing gaze. "Marcus Vale," she said, her holographic form flickering slightly. "I thought you were dead." "Not yet, though not for lack of trying." He took a deep breath. "I need your help, Commander. And I have information about Director Thane that you're going to want to hear." Over the next hour, Marcus laid out everything they knew about Thane's biological weapons program. He watched Rook's expression darken as she realized the implications. If what you're saying is true, she said finally, this goes beyond just the syndicate. There are factions within the colonial government itself who would pay anything for weapons like that. It's worse than that, Venna interjected, stepping into view. The research they're conducting, it could lead to the extinction of entire species. They've already tested early versions on isolated colonies. Rook's eyes widened slightly at the sight of Venna, but she maintained her composure. I have a network of contacts, people who've been investigating Thane for years. They've never been able to prove anything concrete. She paused, studying them. With your testimony, and evidence of his experiments. You want us to go public, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. I want you to help us bring him down, Rook corrected. But it won't be easy. Thane has powerful friends, and the syndicate's reach extends into every corner of colonial space. Celine had stopped practicing, her young face serious as she listened. They'll try to kill us, she said matter-of-factly. They'll try, Marcus agreed, resting a hand on her shoulder. But we're not alone anymore. Over the next few days, the Starseeker made contact with various members of Rook's network. They met in shadowy bars on frontier worlds, in abandoned orbital platforms, in the back rooms of legitimate businesses that served as fronts for the resistance. Each contact brought new pieces of the puzzle, financial records, shipping manifests, testimonies from escaped test subjects. But it was during one of these meetings that everything went wrong. They'd arranged to meet a data broker on a crowded space station in the Outer Rim. The broker claimed to have access to Thane's personal files, evidence that would expose not just his weapons program, but his connections to corrupted government officials. Marcus knew it was risky, but they needed that data. He left Venna and Celine on the ship, despite their protests, and went to the meeting alone. The broker was waiting in a private room at the back of a noisy cantina. Show me what you have, Marcus said, sitting across from the hooded figure. The broker reached into their cloak, and pulled out a neural disruptor. Before Marcus could react, pain exploded through his head as the device activated. He fell forward, his muscles spasming, as syndicate troops emerged from hidden panels in the walls. Through the haze of pain, he saw Regina Blackwood step out of the shadows, her cybernetic augmentations gleaming. Did you really think we wouldn't find you? She asked, her artificial voice tinged with amusement. Director Thane sends his regards. Marcus tried to reach for his blaster, but his body wouldn't respond. The neural disruptor had completely paralyzed him. Then, just as Regina raised her hand to signal her troops, the lights in the cantina went out. In the darkness, a familiar glow began to build, not just Venna's pearl-like luminescence, but something more. The air itself seemed to shimmer with energy. Venna stood in the doorway, her entire body radiating power. Beside her, Celine's small form glowed just as brightly. Together, mother and daughter reached out with their abilities, not to harm, but to protect. The neural disruptor shorted out. Regina's augmentations failed. The syndicate troops dropped their weapons, overcome by the waves of energy pulsing through the room. Impossible, Regina whispered, staring at her malfunctioning cybernetics. The file said nothing about this level of power. Because we choose when to reveal ourselves, Venna said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the air vibrate. We are not your weapons. We are not your test subjects. We are free. Marcus struggled to his feet, his head still ringing from the disruptor's effects. As he looked at Venna and Celine, he saw them not just as fugitives or even friends, but as something more, symbols of hope in a galaxy that desperately needed it. The syndicate troops were unconscious, their minds overwhelmed by the luminized display of power. Regina remained conscious, but her augmentations were completely fried. She looked at Marcus with something close to fear. This isn't over, she said, backing away. Thane will never stop hunting them. No, Marcus agreed, drawing his blaster. But we're done running. Tell Thane that we're coming for him. And we're bringing the truth with us. Nexus Station loomed before them, its massive form eclipsing the stars behind it. From the Starseeker's cockpit, Marcus could see the heavy security presence, patrol ships and automated defense platforms forming a web of protection around the station. Somewhere in there, behind all those defenses, Director Thane waited in his fortress of steel and secrets. Commander Rook's forces are in position, Marcus said, checking the encrypted communications display. When we make our move, we'll have support from 3 resistance cells and a handful of Colonial Defense Force ships loyal to her. Venna stood beside him, her glow subdued but steady. And the evidence? All compiled and ready to broadcast. He patted the data core strapped to his belt. Everything we gathered about Thane's experiments, his government connections, the failed tests on those colonies, once this goes public, there'll be no hiding from it. Then why do you still feel afraid? Celine asked from her position behind them. Over the past weeks, her empathic abilities had grown stronger, more focused. Marcus turned to face them both. Because this is the point of no return. If we fail. We won't, Venna said softly, placing her hand on his arm. The touch sent a warm current through him, not just from her natural bioluminescence, but from something deeper. Their connection had grown stronger too, though neither of them had put it into words yet. The plan was audacious, perhaps even foolish. While Rook's forces engaged the station's outer defenses, the Starseeker would slip through using codes Marcus had obtained from his underworld contacts. They would infiltrate the research levels, broadcast the evidence, and confront Thane himself. Remember, Marcus said as they began their approach, stick to the plan. No heroics. Venna's lips curved in a slight smile. Says the man who threw away everything to help 2 strangers. The first part went smoothly, almost too smoothly. The codes worked, and the Starseeker docked without incident. They encountered minimal resistance as they made their way through the station's corridors, Celine's abilities warning them of approaching patrols before they arrived. It wasn't until they reached the research levels that they understood why. Director Thane was waiting for them. He stood in his private laboratory, surrounded by stasis tubes containing failed experiments and partial successes. He was a tall, thin man with cold eyes and an expression of clinical interest, as if they were specimens that had wandered into his lab for study. Fascinating, he said, watching as Venna and Celine's light pulsed in response to his presence. Such power, such potential. And you've been using it to run and hide. It's over, Thane, Marcus said, raising his blaster. The evidence is already being transmitted. Everyone will know what you've done here. Thane smiled, and Marcus felt his blood run cold. You think I didn't plan for this? That I didn't want you to come here? He pressed a button on his console, and force field sprang up around them, separating Marcus from Venna and Celine. Your broadcast is being blocked. And now I have exactly what I need, live specimens, their powers enhanced by weeks of stress and constant use. Behind him, screens lit up showing the space battle occurring outside. Rook's forces were engaged with station security, but they were outnumbered. The resistance cells had been expected, prepared for. Your revolution dies here, Thane said, activating another control. Gas began to fill the chambers containing Venna and Celine. And your deaths will serve a greater purpose. But Thane had made a crucial mistake. In his arrogance, in his scientific certainty, he had underestimated the very power he sought to control. Venna and Celine reached for each other through the gas, their hands touching through the force field that separated them. Their combined light grew until it was almost blinding. What are you doing? Thane demanded, his composure cracking. That's impossible. The force fields are rated to contain your abilities. You never understood, Venna said, her voice resonating with power. Our abilities aren't about force or containment. They're about life itself. And life always finds a way. The force field shattered. The gas dissipated, transformed by their power into harmless light. Marcus, protected by their abilities, raised his blaster again. No! Thane reached for a weapon, but Marcus was faster. The shot caught Thane in the shoulder, spinning him into his own control console. As Thane fell, alarms began blaring throughout the station. On the screens, they could see more ships arriving, not station security, but Colonial Defense Force vessels. Rook's full fleet had arrived. "It's done," Marcus said, checking the console. "The evidence is broadcasting on all frequencies. Every colony, every world, they'll all know the truth." Thane laughed weakly from the floor. "You think that changes anything? There will always be others like me. Power like theirs, it's too valuable to ignore." "Maybe," Marcus agreed, helping Venna and Celine step over Thane's fallen form. "But now everyone will be watching. And they won't be alone." In the days that followed, as Thane's network crumbled and his allies abandoned him, Marcus watched as the truth spread across the galaxy. The public was horrified by the experiments, moved by the story of a mother and daughter running for their freedom, inspired by those who had helped them. The colonial government, facing massive protests, launched investigations into corruption within its ranks. The syndicate's operations were exposed and their leadership scattered. It wasn't a complete victory, such things rarely are, but it was a beginning. 1 month later, the Starseeker drifted in orbit around a peaceful agricultural world, far from the politics and power struggles of the core systems. Marcus found Venna on the observation deck, watching the sunset paint the atmosphere in brilliant colors. "The refugees from Thane's other experiments have been found," he said. "They're being returned to their homes." Venna nodded. "And those whose homes were destroyed? Commander Rook has arranged sanctuary for them. No more running, no more hiding." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the light play across the planet's surface. From somewhere deeper in the ship, they could hear Celine laughing as she practiced controlling her abilities, no longer afraid of their power. "What will you do now?" Venna asked softly. Marcus looked at her, at the way her light seemed to dance in harmony with the setting sun. "I was thinking of staying," he said. "If you'll have me." Her answer came not in words, but in the way her light brightened, reaching out to merge with his shadow, creating something new and beautiful in the space between them. The Starseeker continued its orbit, carrying its crew, no longer fugitives, no longer alone, toward whatever adventure awaited them next. And in the depths of space, their story spread, a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, light could be found, if only you were brave enough to protect it.